All right. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Kirsty with Rewylding the Feminine, interviews with the women I love and the work they do to serve in the healing arts. And today I have my teacher and esteemed colleague and friend, Nancy Hazen, a therapist, and she practices bioenergetics. And I'm really excited to introduce you to my community and the at-large community. And we're going to talk about some projects that Nancy has been working on for a few years, right? Your book, your new book that's going to be up and coming. And then also
He was very polite.
Yeah. I know you've been working on it for a while, so. And then it's a process. And then also just kind of talk about bioenergetics. What is bioenergetics? Because I think there's a lot of people, I think what you do, Nancy, is very unique. Because in talk therapy, a lot of times we don't root it in the soma and in the body, and you really help people find words in the type of work you do that elucidates and roots the work. And that's my experience of it, so that they can really heal and move on and not be stuck in the just kind of the, well, the chitta is the way I put it, right? The monkey mind.
Nice word.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit about bioenergetics and how you got into it. And I mean, you have years of experience, so.
I do, many. And I want to say you're my teacher and my friend and my healer too. So it's been a mutual experience, I think, because we're both are, I think our work is very related and relatable. And I learned from your work by taking it in as well. And I think that's the nature of all of this healing work, but certainly body, core, energetic related body work. So we're in the spirit of this. Yeah. And my book is actually called Healing the Wild and the Child. So it's very related to your title even.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, no, probably mistake there that we're interested in the same subject.
Actually, the title of my book is not Healing the Wild and the Child. It's Freeing the Wild and the Child. And it's basically a book about healing trauma that children experience and then continue carrying on into the rest of their lives if there's not some way to intervene, and hopefully the earlier the better. I mean, that's the hope and the prayer. And I think from what I see, it's an effective way to work on a body level with children before they develop a character structure, which is something that they will take on just as they take their belief systems on. Their body will become hardened and more rigid in whatever they have to do to survive the trauma. So that's the journey.
Yeah, and I mean, I was gonna just add to that, it's that one of the things that's beautiful about the work you do is your willingness to work with children, because not everybody's willing to work with children and trauma. And that's really kind of getting something before it moves into adulthood, right? Where we perpetuate a pattern, it can turn into addiction, disease, all kinds of pain, all kinds of things.
And usually the stuff that we bring with us that becomes most troublesome or can usually get started between 0 and 3. Now they're saying, they used to say between 0 and 5. But so to try to work on issues that are deeply rooted in our core without addressing the body issues, the preconscious issues, I think we can gain a huge amount of insight, which is important. But in terms of actually changing and transforming, we have to address the what's locked in our body. And we can come at it from many different directions. And bioenergetics was one of the earliest forms of psychotherapy that evolved from Wilhelm Reich's work. And Wilhelm Reich was a student of Freud, so it goes way back.
Mm-hmm.
One of my teachers was a student of Reich's. So anyway.
Yeah, well, and that's like when you're talking 0 to 3, kind of pre-verbal. I mean, would you even take it before 0?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
0 keeps going.
Right, right. It goes further back. Yeah, because that's
Absolutely.
that's what I've noticed in my work too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's and I'm obviously don't get sick of it because here I still am doing it.
And well, we're so lucky that you are, because you've treated so many people in our community. So that's like really powerful, because I feel like it's, like when you drop the pebble in the pond and you see the ripples, it truly is each person that you touch, just it goes and it just keeps going, and that's kind of what I think is the magic of the work that we do and why we still show up.
Yes, and I even think that there's a level of the ripples can be not necessarily directly. I mean, I think as we heal, our DNA connects with other people, and there are levels of ripples that I certainly don't pretend to know about, but I think they exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some interesting experiences that point in that direction.
So Nancy, are you open? I think in your book, you mentioned to me that you're talking more about your personal experience in the work. Are you interested in mentioning why you're
doing it that way?
Drawn to the 0 to 3?
Sure. I was born during the Second World War. My father went to war, and he didn't have to. He volunteered and he said to me when I was an adult and confronted him angrily about it during the Vietnam War, and he was a hawk and I was a dove, and I basically confronted him about the fact that he had gone to war during that time, and I had a lot of anger at the government because of that, right, at that time. And he said, you shouldn't be angry with the government because I volunteered, I didn't have to go. And he said, but you have to, and he said that was a terrible mistake, but you have to understand how we were thinking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, but it's taken me a lifetime.
Yeah.
Because I think we're in that same, and I'm going to get emotional.
Yeah. I can feel it already. I can feel it.
Right. I think we're in that
doom,
same,
right?
that same kind of time in history where the issues that we're facing are so awesome and overwhelming that we make decisions sometimes that we may regret, but it comes from love and wanting to protect, right, life on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty forgivable mistake in human beings, I think. My mother got cancer as he was leaving for the war, and she was pregnant with my brother. I was 7 months old. I almost died on the trip going, and my father was barely able to get my mother back home to her parents before he left. And he was in the South Pacific and expected her not to make it through the pregnancy. And he was not expected to come home from the war. So that was what was going on around me as a small child, and my siblings. I had a sister and a brother. And I was a deeply troubled young adult when I began to really take a serious look at how that had impacted me. Because from my point of view, I had very loving parents. I'd had an opportunity for a good education. I'd grown up in middle-class white America and felt, it was the 50s. Everything was whitewashed. Everything was perfect, right? And I was having a really seriously difficult time making my way in the world, and was blaming myself for that, and got into therapy, thank God. And my children were very small. So I had not only my own trauma to learn from, but I had my own children's trauma to learn from and heal from. And my feeling is that it is so hard as parents to recognize the mistakes we make and the impact they have on our children, that it would make it easier for parents to read if they read a personal story as well as a clinical description of what I do and why I do it. Try to use my life as a jumping off place to talk about what children need and various ways that I've found to deliver what they need. Does that make sense? If not,
it's quite personal and it's very real. I mean, I think we talk a lot about in the healing arts about we're the wounded healers, right? That we enter this profession to heal ourselves and the people around us as well. I mean, we can't not.
Right. No, that's right. And once we have done the work, even if we don't go into the healing profession, having done the work, there is something about our being here that has a healing effect on the people around us. And I think just a given. When we can heal it, we have that to extend. So this was a particularly, I would say my one ambition in life while I was on a healing journey was to outlive my children's need for me, because my mother hadn't. I didn't expect to be happy. I didn't expect, I think I thought once my kids were grown, I would dissolve into a little pile of dust. That would be
No, it's a little and blow away in the wind.
Right. And when they were all out of the nest and I was suddenly not doing that, which had been a real journey, and I already had a lot of joy and happiness in my life, I suddenly realized I had a whole life ahead of me. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever been happier in spite of what's going on in the world. And that seems extraordinary to me.
It
I'm not
may,
all the time.
it may seem extraordinary, Nancy, but I just want to say that it seems that almost everybody that I'm talking to while I'm doing this Rewilding the Feminine during the pandemic time, it seems that those of us who healed through our trauma are able to kind of go, I don't know if it's the wrong word, but cruise a little bit. I mean, we're feeling what's happening, but we're also able to understand it from our training and our background.
My teacher, and I want to say something about him. My teacher, Frank Ladke, was an international trainer of bioenergetics. He was a colleague of Lowen, who was the creator of bioenergetics, and I met them together in a workshop in LA. It was mostly at that point an East Coast. And I came for a workshop in New Mexico in February in 1983 and bought a house on my way home with 2 teenagers in tow and no job. And I had a lot of moments when I wasn't sure I was up to it, but I never thought I'd made a mistake. He stayed my teacher for the rest of his life. So that was from 1983 to 2012. And I watched him. He was already a magnificent healing presence, but I watched him go through a lot of transitions as a healer. And the last day of his life, he was leading a workshop with 84, at 84, with 5 people from all over the world. He did a, intensive day, which is intense. and went home and was listening to classical music and reading a book. And that's when he left the earth.
Oh, wow. That's,
as his granddaughter said, with a smile on his face. And that was Frank. And and Frank took grief hard as I did when I watched him go through the process of losing the dearest person in his life at that time. I really was concerned about him at that point in his life because it was so hard on him. And by the time he was in his 80s, I saw him go through a lot of grief. As we get older, we do, right? Mm-hmm. Some things had to have been really devastating. And he said, I'm like a cork. And a big wave comes along and it hits me, but I come up to the top. And he said, I don't know why that's true, but it is.
Oh, what an interesting metaphor. And that's like, probably speaks to his access to resilience.
Yep.
Yeah. And
his wisdom around taking care of himself, I think, too. Mm-hmm. I watched that whole process as well. It was quite a wonderful, incredible journey. And I always thought there would come a time when I would go to see Frank and would just be because I wanted to hug Frank, not because I felt I had anything to learn. And I never hit that point.
Well, you studied with him for 30 years. I mean, that's right. I mean, that's like most of us don't spend, honestly, I'm trying to think, we'll spend 5 years with a teacher, 10 years, 15 even, but it's not always really a big chunk of our lives. It makes him part of your tribe and family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The minute we met, I would say that was true. Yeah. He loved the outdoors. He was a rancher. He had originally wanted to be a classical musician. Both my sons are musicians. I mean, we had all of these different weavings in our friendship. And he had been the head of the Neuropsychiatric Institute in Tulsa for 17 years before he became a bioenergetics trainer. Mm-hmm. The only person on earth, I think, who ever ran a psychiatric hospital and community mental health and trained all of his staff to work with them on a body level. And we're talking about schizophrenics and people with bipolar disorder and people who were, well, you know the list. Anyway, this was back when they hospitalized people for a long time. He said the schizophrenics used to come into the waiting room just to feel the energy, just to hang out there.
Believe that.
Yeah. So he was in a position to help me learn to use bioenergetics, doing community mental health. And I worked for Indian Health Service for 10 years when I first arrived, and really created my work out of that experience. I was kind of moving as fast as I can, trying to come up with things that were helpful as quickly as I could with a lot of people, because I was serving 2 communities, and I was all there was. So I was doing a lot of group work and needed to find some way to help children be more in their bodies and help their families help them be more in their bodies. So, and I was seeing adults as well as kids, and I still do. In fact, I see more adults now than I do children because of my age.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it
up and down off the floor.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, kids have more, right? They have a little bit more, you have to have the physical resilience to not get taken out yourself if you're working with a child. I mean,
exactly. And to do it safely. You need to be pretty strong and dress to do it safely. Certainly.
I know that too with some of my colleagues who are trained in like babies and children's with craniosacral. Some of them, as they're aging, they don't want to see any babies over 6 months because it's, you know, what it takes to move them around.
Yeah.
You know, it's just takes a lot out of our own body too. People don't always think about that. Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
let's bring it.
I would say, Kirsty, you probably at this point helped me get up and down off the floor more than anybody else.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to bring it back to the book that you've been working on for so long, and I know it's gonna be self-published. It's not quite published yet, but you're really talking. What I'm really intrigued by is that you're talking about personal experience with clinical experience. So it either can be for somebody for themselves, but then also somebody who's training and wanting to do more work in bioenergetics and incorporating that, they can actually use that as a platform, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how to bring that into their practice.
Absolutely, right. That's the idea. I mean, I want it to be written mostly to clinicians. That's mostly who I want to be able to say here, if you want more of an example. I'm teaching more lately, and I want to be able to give people something that will help them, you know, look into it more if they're interested. But I wanted it to be applied to parents and teachers as well. And I hope that's what it does. I mean, it took me a long time, partly because it's two voices. And keeping those two voices separate was challenging for me, because it's an interesting exercise.
Yeah, I have another colleague who's writing a book that's more of an autobiography, but they're going through their own metamorphosis too in writing it. I'm assuming that there was a little bit of like going back into your own life and pulling things up was like, you know, it's like a life review, and that can have an emotional component to it as well.
Indeed, it did. And
Yeah.
there are things about it that are, going to be, I don't know how I feel about sharing. I'll find out, won't I? But I teach a lot out of my life because I think it does make people less ashamed if the person in front of them has some sense of what it's like to feel out of control and like they're, not making good choices that in terms of their children and the people that they love the most, and can't change it as quickly as they'd like, because none of us ever do, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it hopefully that's a helpful thing, not just a self-indulgent thing.
No, I think so, because I think, when we vulnerability and our own experience is shared, it really helps people. I don't know why, Nancy, so I'm just going to throw this out. Having this image of when I was going through my divorce and my mom was in the car, she came out to help me move, and it was, cell phone. So I had the cell phone, it was a flip, right? I had a cell phone in the hand, and my ex-husband called, and it was really just literally in the first month or so of going through a divorce. And he said something that just pissed me off. And I remember I just said something like, "That motherfucker," or something. And I threw the phone on the floor because my mom was driving. And then this next very thought was like, "Oh shit, I don't want to break the cell phone. I can't afford to replace it." There was like this whole thing where I actually let go of the anger in the moment, but then it was like that "oh shit" moment. Like, I don't want to break the phone either because I need it. And that was quite a while ago. That was like 15 years ago. But
Yes,
I mean, and I'm not like me to express something like that, like to throw something. Like I don't think I had ever expressed anger yet at that level with like throwing an object. It was very humbling to see that part of myself coming forward in, as a parent.
I have to quote Frank when I was complaining about that with Frank at some point. He said, "Good, you need to do more of that." And I don't like it. He said, "You'll get used to it."
Yeah, that's great.
It takes us a while to get to a point where we can find ways to do it that are comfortable and not embarrassing, right? Or potentially destructive to property or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
I've got to
go ahead.
interrupt. I'm really sorry. I got to get my dog out of here because he's just being totally awful.
Oh, well, let me just pause it. Okay. So we were just yakking. It's okay.
Okay.
Dogs are important. They're family.
Well, he was chewing on my leg, so I had to get.
Yeah. So let's see. Go from there. What do you think?
What?
I just had shared the story, where I threw the phone and expressed anger. And I think you really just brought up like your response of like quoting Frank. I know you're so respectful of Frank, but and I watched the training videos from Frank and when I train with you and everything, but I have to say that there's a very powerful Nancy that also has like embodies, and you have like a wisdom that you really bring forth in your work that's really you in honor of your teacher, but it's you,
not just little Frank.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm thinking about him a lot today because I am finishing my book, and he was the one that said you need to write this. So I'm feeling like I've done that. And he did not work with children. He did a little tiny bit, but he really didn't. He really wanted me to work with children. He encouraged it and wanted other people to learn to work with children. But when he was, Lowen didn't believe in working with kids this way. Because he thought that if you teach a child to express and they're living with parents who are not free themselves, not healed themselves, that they will be harmful to children or more harmful to children because it will trigger them. And I think he was absolutely wise and right about that. However, I think the way you see children is to see their parents as well, and to see them in their family and to feel comfortable working with their parents through the process and observe them with their kids. So that's my pitch.
Mm-hmm. So that is different because that's more in like family systems therapy, right? To tie the whole thing together and to treat the whole family as a system, which a lot of times people, I think it's Artie Lang who wants to say, the schizophrenic comes out of the family system, but a lot of people want to blame the schizophrenic. They don't want to see it as like a systems-based issue that everybody involved created the scenario, if you will. Yeah.
Right. My background was TA Gestalt, and transactional analysis is really looking at the dynamic between people as the problem, as the patient, rather than diagnosing each person, looking at the interaction and learning to heal that. And it was a very good, I don't think that's the whole story, but I think it was very good early training, particularly if I wanted to work with couples and families, because it taught me to see that way and kind of to see how we could change that dynamic, and then to apply it to parents raising children as well. And yes, I would say what I do is a combination of family systems work, Gestalt TA, and bioenergetics, and whatever else I've managed to glean in 40 some years of working this way.
Yeah, and it seems like you also have intuition and jazz in the work that you do too. Like you've been doing it long enough that you know how to let whatever there's an art in what you're doing. That's what I'm trying to say. There's an art, right? What comes up in the moment, you may respond to the situation. And because we're also, I want to be clear for anybody who watches this, the bioenergetic work is also in the body. So it might happen in movement or working with tools or, it's very physical.
It's releasing muscular blocks that interfere with expressing emotion, and really focusing on teaching people to ground their energy rather than coming up in their heads and figuring it out, which is what we do as children if we can't be held enough. So it's learning to teach people to mother themselves, to learn to contain and ground and love their own energy and emotions, and release in ways that are safe, to direct it, not to control it. That makes sense. And yeah, all bioenergetics therapists are really trained to use their intuition. Lowen mostly saw energy, and he was brilliant. He could look at your body and go up at like a surgeon and tell you what had happened, but just by starting at your feet, coming up the body, and he could see everything. I see some, right? Mostly because I've been trained, or if I look long enough, I can see energy, but I am very aesthetic and I feel it in my own body. And it leads me to helping people feel something that they may be blocking, but I can feel. I can say, why don't you breathe into your diaphragm right now and see what comes up? And so I'm tracking in my own system usually, and using myself as a thermometer, sort of.
Yeah. Well, that works. I mean, those of us who feel that way and body, do this kind of work, that empath. And then we also have to learn, of course, how to get out of that, right? For our own self-care, but
right.
It's very helpful.
Right. It actually, being a therapist and learning what it was for has also taught me how to filter and not use it when I'm not needing it.
So maybe we can, I'm kind of wondering, I don't know, I don't have a client example in mind, but like how, I'm trying to think of like somebody not a real person, but just some kind of situation where somebody, there's a child inside a family unit, that what kind of behaviors or symptomology would we see that would maybe lead somebody to come see you, like as a family? What do we see? I'm just.
I would say one of the most enjoyable times of my life was when I was the director of an early childhood program, and we did groups called the Parents Corner, Kids Corner, and people would bring their kids to play with my staff doing play therapy, and they were all being trained as play therapists while I talked to parents, and the kids were around us, partly because we only had this little bitty space. But what we found was preschoolers love to be talked about. And they love that all these adults are sitting around talking about them, agreeing, right? Because they need community, they need tribe. So we're all sitting there talking about problems. And kids would walk in the door, these little bitty kids would walk in the door and say, hi, Mommy and I had a problem this week and we need to talk about it. And then they'd go play, and they'd be acting out the situation with the staff while we talked about it in the room. And almost every parent would start out by breaking down and saying, please don't judge me. I couldn't bear it if you did. I have the worst kid in town I know. I don't know what's wrong, but he just got kicked out of preschool. How do you get kicked out of preschool?
Yeah. Well, and as a parent, it's like the worst. It's the worst feeling, because you feel like it's your fault as a parent.
Exactly.
I mean, I just.
Clearly at that point, our preschools were not meeting our children's needs, right? If you're kicking a kid out of preschool for being aggressive and not teaching him what to do with his impulses and his energy, then the problem is with the preschool. You know, the kid may have some issues, but the problem is with the preschool. That's my philosophy. And, but it was amazing to me how often that happened, how often that was, and frequently these kids were at that time being seen by our culture as ADHD, right? And the people were talking already when they were in preschool about putting them on some kind of medication.
That just infuriates me. I
I
mean,
know.
my daughter was, quote unquote, like some people felt like she was hard to handle, had some of that. But, you know, like I remember one day it was, I think she was in kindergarten, and they sent me a note and they said, you know, you need to, you know, control your child was the wording. And then I found out that somebody had brought in brownies for one of the kids' birthdays and fed her sugar. And we don't do a lot of sugar in our household. And sugar pushes her, like,
Right
of course.
over the roof.
Yeah. And of course it's going to make her seem like she has ADHD. You just injected her with sugar. I was so furious as a parent. So the principal did not get a nice letter from me that week, but no, it's not my fault. You drugged my child. We need to talk about that.
Well, a lot of times kids, I mean, kids only have a few ways to express it. One reason why they may be expressing that kind of over excitement is sugar. Another reason may be some kind of neurological thing that's a little bit, you know, needing to be digested by the child, and it takes a while. A lot of times very bright kids have very complicated perceptual gifts, and it takes them a while to be able to integrate all that and learn how to use it. It covers a lot of times if kids have grown up in violent households, what they do is about what they've seen or what they've experienced or what they're feeling about it at the time. And it's kids digest their world through play, and they can actually inflict harm onto other children, not because they want to be harmful, but because they're trying to find a way to connect and express and heal it. So doing group work with children at that point was really exciting and fun, but it was really working with kids on finding, I mean, one thing we used to do was put the mats down and have all the kids wrestle, and they'd have to take turns, and the other kids were witnessing while two kids were on the mat. Anybody could tap out and leave and have somebody else come in. So they always had an outlet. But at that point, it was Power Rangers that was on the television. And if you two little kids to wrestle, what do you think they did? First thing, kicked each other in the head because of what they were watching. They weren't trying to hurt anybody. They had no idea that there were consequences. They thought they were doing what they were told to do, you know? And so we'd be sitting on the edge of the mat ready to grab them and say, no, 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 that's not wrestling. This is wrestling. You find, so teaching kids to really find their impulses and be able to direct their energy in ways that led them into pleasure and contact. And the rules were always, the groups we were doing with kids without their parents that were called Let's Be Friends groups. And the idea was, if you hurt people, they don't want to be your friend. So friends help each other. They don't hurt each other. There's always a way to get angry feelings out, but you don't do it in a way that hurts your friends. So that's what we're here to learn. And kids love those groups. They just love it.
Sounds really healing for a child and a family to have that kind of support. And that's really, I think what you just pointed out too is really important, is that it's through culture and like through media and stuff that they're learning these other forms of behavior as well. It could maybe happen within a family context, but can also happen, you know, through social, you know, media, TVs, etc. And they don't know how to regulate that, right? Because they haven't learned.
and they're scared of it. So what they do a lot of, and parents are tired, you know, both parents are working. They turn the television on or the video games at this point on, and a lot of times there's violent content in them, and the kids zone out, and the parents are working zoned out because they're exhausted. And there is no kinesthetic outlet for children to really learn to connect with each other and their compassion for each other. They do that through roughhouse. They learn to go easy, you know, just like a little puppy learns with the other puppies how to wrestle without hurting somebody. That's how kids learn. And we've removed that ingredient from kids' lives to such an extent that and now they don't even have a park to go to right now. I mean, it's just, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
I have to come back from that and heal from that, because you can't take that biological piece out of a child and have a whole child.
Right. Well, because we talk with you know, the neurons that fire together wire together, right? So if you have that kind of positive play, that loving and safe environment, then you're creating that wiring in the nervous system.
Exactly.
Right? And then you're reiterating that so that they can heal, and then they learn boundaries. So that's one that I really liked about your work, is that you immediately teach boundary work, like between you and your client. And that's like one of the biggest takeaways I've had actually just in life and passed on to my students and clients, is how to say no. And realize that we can establish a boundary. You see, even I want to just do it. I'm already I want to come into like
feel your wrist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's so powerful, because we don't always know that boundaries are healthy.
So that when kids are wrestling or roughhousing in the playroom, we had a rule, which is you couldn't do anything to hurt anybody. And if somebody got hurt by accident, we would stop and take a break and figure out what had happened and then go on. If kids got mad and hurt each other and there was intent in it, then we did a whole group meeting around it, and the group got to give feedback about how to help with that problem the next time, rather than making it wrong or bad. And kids love that. Kids would, when we were trying to write another grant, the kids all wanted to write letters about how this was the best thing they'd ever done in their whole lives so far, because nobody was telling them that their energy and their impulses were good, not bad. I said to a group once, how many of you think you have too much energy? And this was a private school, privileged school. These were kids making really good grades. Every single child in the room raised their hand.
That they had too much energy? Wow.
Yeah. And I said, energy is aliveness. How can you be too alive? And everybody applauded. But think of that message that we're giving to children, right? It's just, and then the next thing I said is, you know, sometimes we don't know how to ground our energy and direct our energy and be responsible for our energy. And that's what this class is about. But you can't have too much.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I think every child should hear that. And I think there's a lot of children who grew up on meds for ADHD that have, you know, as adults are angry that, you know, they got that label, they got, you know, suppressed. They don't feel like, you know, that some of their aliveness got taken away from them.
And we're talking about rewilding women. Is that right?
That's part of it. I mean, this is rewilding the feminine, but for me, so, you know, like with Joseph Campbell's work and the hero's journey, you know, like the warrior goes out and their journey feminine has a very different way of working, right? Like with in the Celtic mythology, for example, the Selkie story, where the man steals the seal skin, right, and kind of forces her to become the wife, bear a child, but she has a longing to go back to the ocean and the sea. And then what happens when she finds her daughter actually helps her to find her seal skin, when they find it hidden in the boat underneath his old coat, whatever fisherman coat, it's like just pieces, that original skin. So she can't put that on. So she has to go find the old crone, right, to request almost to get it back. But then what happens is, you know, in the story, she actually has to take on a whole brand new skin, which is actually from another seal, a younger seal, in order to go back to be with her sisters. And it's a more complicated story, but I think I just lost you, Nancy. Whoops. You are. See? Now you're this is our creative way. When the battery runs out, we're FaceTiming now, so I can wrap it up with Nancy. I was just sharing with you, Nancy, the Selkie story, and I'm sure you've heard that before. So I think as women, I
love it.
Yeah, we have to just put on a new skin. We have to take on a new skin, and we really are like the snake, right? Shedding the skin and starting over. And I think that's so different than the hero's journey, where they go back out and then they're like welcome back with, I don't know, parade or something, you know, back into the family. But as women, we transform. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think you heal the wild, you free the wild in the child by giving them permission, and you heal the wild in the woman by giving her permission to be as powerful and beautiful and wild as she is, don't you think?
Yeah, I like that.
And hopefully, if we can free the wild in the child, especially in little girls who need permission to be their whole feminine self, it won't be quite such a long journey to get back to themselves. That's the hope.
Yeah.
But the journey's not so bad either.
Well, that's part of it, isn't it? The journey is the part of the healing and the exploration and the aliveness and the joy and
absolutely.
Yeah. Fun.
Wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, ditto. It's so great. I'm so grateful to have you in my life, Nancy. Thank you.
Well, you too, and I miss you. I told you I missed you. We were just talking. I had a client today, and we were just commiserating about how much we miss you.
Oh, this is so great. All right, I'm going to hit pause on the video, and then I can finish up on the phone with you. All right.